This particular house was probably built sometime in the 1850s. You'll notice the whole building is kind of sunk down into the ground, probably a foot or 2 feet maybe. So inside the ceiling is pretty low. I don't know how long this thing has been abandoned, probably close to 100 years I would suspect. I basically became interested in this 6 years ago. I was halfway through my senior year of college and basically clueless of what I would do with myself. I came home on winter break and a friend said, "Hey, did you see the newspaper ad about someone wanting someone to come and take down an old log house, otherwise they were gonna demolish it?" And I said, "Well, no, I didn't even know they existed." Up to that point, I thought log house, okay, something about, Abe Lincoln, and, didn't understand that these things could survive 150 years later. Here's a log house that's still lived in. So that spring, I started taking down that first house and then kept finding them and kind of became obsessed. Right up here on the left, I don't know for sure whether it's log or not, but it damn near looks like it. So it was at that time that I started driving around the country. That spring I put something like 5,000 miles on my truck, basically just driving around the countryside and looking for them. This farmstead, there's a sweet little abandoned log house down here, and I think they're actually gonna bulldoze it in this spring. They claim it was built in like 1855 or something. Unfortunately, it's way too far gone. I would approach farmers and, say, "Hey, I see you have this abandoned log house sitting out in the woods. Like, can I have it?" Where are the logs? Up there, you can see the logs. And 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, "That thing's been rotting away for the last 50 years, it's junk to me, so sure, you can have it." You'll notice all the framing in this thing is rough hewn little pieces of trees. I became obsessed and basically said, I want these things for myself. I want to collect them, if anything. Up here, you'll notice the lath, and then right behind the lath are the logs back in there. Pretty cool. It's really fun to find these buildings and open up the wall for the first time and expose the logs. So this is a pretty sweet little building. This thing dates probably to the 1850s or 1860s. This house was lived in until maybe 5 years ago. So in a lot of ways I kind of got over my head in that first year. It was all very fun. It was like, one huge goose chase. How do I know it's log? You can tell by the fact that the window wells are so deep in it. On a stick-built, 2x4 house, the window wells will be 4 inches thick. But on a log building, where those window shades are, that's about a good 9 or 10 inches deep. Pretty exciting when you find these things and you go up next to them and peer under the siding and realize there's a log corner right there. You can see the bottom log right there. Pretty rotten. Trying to reuse it is difficult and not very practical, unfortunately. A beautiful building though, it's too bad. These are just all over the landscape and, they're getting burned all the time. So people just, they don't want to pay taxes on these things, rightfully so. So they just light them on fire to get rid of them. It's really too bad. The Iowa landscape is changing dramatically. There's all sorts of pressure to take land into production. You look at commodity prices over the last 10 years, the price of corn is quadrupled now. The landscape is just being chewed up. Forests are being bulldozed in and burned. Farmsteads are being bulldozed in and burned. Over the last 6 years, there are a few dozen houses that I know of that have been torn down in that time for making way for farmland. This place is like a rainforest in the summer. It's impossible to see where you're going. People have this idea of Iowa being this real flat, boring landscape filled with corn. But the far corner of northeast Iowa, we have lots of bluffs, lots of forest. It's not what you think of Iowa. Just right up this valley here is about 1,300 acres of state forest. My little corner of northeast Iowa, Winneshiek County, was settled almost exclusively by Norwegians beginning in about 1850. This photo right here was taken in the 1860s. There were a group of about 25 families that came that first year, and they brought with them a real long and rich tradition of building with log houses. The Overland house is pretty special. The Overlands came here in 1854. They settled right south of where I am now. In 1856, Johannes built this really large, beautiful log house. This house remained in the same family from when it was built to when I took it down 2 years ago. I think 5 generations had passed over that time. The last people to live in it died about 8 years ago, and their son gave me the house. They decided they didn't want it anymore, so they gave it to me. The really cool thing is they'd never even seen the logs inside the house before. I was up there investigating the house, and the guy said, sure, you can bust open a hole in the wall, and so I did. When I busted this hole open in the wall, I thought, oh crap, once I expose these logs, there's no way they're going to want to give this thing up now. But they did. I love old things. Opening up a wall and uncovering this completely preserved log house within the building, underneath that wall, these beautiful logs that have been sitting there for 150 years is totally fascinating. So eventually, after a whole season's of work, I had basically a barn full of old materials. This pile of logs is one building. This pile over here is another building. These are bur oak logs. You can see the growth rings in these. They're minuscule. This log is probably 200 years old right here. This particular house was built in 1852, and these logs are 200 years old, so it means these trees started growing in 1650 or before. So I labeled everything I could label, labeled all these pieces, and then using those as templates when I rebuilt the thing. I love old wood. There's something about logs that I just find enchanting. To think that these timbers started to grow hundreds and hundreds of years ago. To think that the resources were so plentiful back then that you could build your house that's almost literally entirely solid wood.
Okay.
To think of what the world was back then when you'd literally cut down 100 trees, 100 solid, beautiful oak trees, or 100 walnut trees, and stack them all up for the walls of your house. It's that is incredible. The world must have been so plentiful at that point, or at least the American Midwest. So rebuilding this thing was pretty fun. We did the whole thing by hand. I'd get to a certain point where I'd have to have friends help me, so I'd have friends come over and we'd use rope and pull this thing up the wall and put it into place.
Watch it. Okay.
It's kind of scary.
Okay, are we good? Which side? So, okay, we're gonna roll it.
Get the rope out of the way. These logs are 28 feet long. They're oak. Some of them weigh 500 pounds probably. You know, I think this afternoon we did this lifting. I had, 5 people helping me, and we put up maybe a dozen logs in about 3 hours. So back in 2007, I tore down 3 houses. Up to that point, you know, I had no carpentry experience.
Grab it. Watch it.
Hard work was always a virtue in my family. Growing up, you know, I'd painted a million buildings for my father, but in terms of actual carpentry experience, I really didn't have much at all. I think what I've always had going for me is an understanding of how a building should look when it's done. I wasn't a carpenter or anything. I didn't really know how things should be taken apart or how things should go back together. So definitely taking apart houses really gave me a lot of knowledge, and was kind of the knowledge I used to piece all those buildings back together over the last several years. So this side hasn't been sided yet. And then if you come over to this side, I have this one finished. If you look at that old photo of this place, it's exactly the same. I think what I've always had going for me is an understanding of how a building should look when it's done. The roof in this place is pretty unique. The logs go up to the gable peak, and then a series of purlins run across the roof. I've taken a few architectural history classes. I've always been interested in old architecture. So even though I don't know how to piece something back together, I kind of have an understanding of what the end result should look like. And then I kind of stumble my way through the dark to get there. This type of roof, it's pretty uncommon here. In Norway, that roof would have been used to support the weight of a sod roof. But when they came here, they didn't probably intend to put a sod roof on it, but it was kind of how they knew how to build a house, so that's what they did. The Norwegian Americans, they brought with them a 1,000-year tradition of building with logs. And when they came here, a lot of the people didn't necessarily have the understanding of how to build something, but they had the superficial knowledge of what a house should be. The roof boards, they're all reused. There's a date on a rafter from 1863, 64. Pretty much everything I've used in this house is salvaged material. The wood floor, you'll notice, is all tongue and groove fir. The wall in here, you'll notice, is old beadboard. Everything in this place is salvaged. These hand-hewn, draw-knifed floor joists, and then the floorboards above them, they're all hand-planed too. It's pretty spectacular. I tried to take them out and reuse them as best I could. You'll notice things get a little funky when you try to take it apart and reuse it. The front door in the house here, that came out of an old house in town. The beadboard wall came from an old log house that I tore down. You know, you have to realize that when I take these things down, I have enough material for maybe half. This is all the original roof rafters, and then everything over on this side, they were old barn siding boards. As a result, I have to mix and match. The maple flooring is from an old school that was torn down. That door is from a different house. So I try to do these projects as cheap as I possibly can, and that means I have to reuse as many old materials as I possibly can. The challenge with putting electrical in a building like this is, how do you run everything? This light switch right here is buried into this log, and then if you go around the back side, you can see where that wire comes into that conduit box. I do everything myself. I do all my own plumbing, all my own electrical. I built this stud wall. All my electrical work for the second floor runs through this wall. I'm not a professional plumber or a professional electrician, but I think if you're willing to learn something, you can do a reasonable job. So we're in the bathroom right now, and this is the vanity lights. And I love simple porcelain light fixtures. I can go down to the hardware store and these things cost like $1.50, like next to nothing. And I don't shy away from using real cheap light fixtures. I try to make things as easy and as cheap for myself along the way. You'll notice all my electrical I've done here, you know, simple metal conduit with a porcelain fixture and then the CFL bulb. I think they're beautiful, just like they are, and they're so cheap to do it that way. Really simple. I'm not trying to compete with the building in any way. Everything I want to do is sympathetic and harmonious with what's originally there. There's an Amish man who makes all the windows for me. He can do anything I want. And I go to him with all these outrageous requests, and he just kind of shakes his head like, you're nuts, but yeah, I can do that for you. These windows, you know, they're 4-light windows. They're double hung sashes, meaning that the bottom sash comes up, and then you can pull these little pins, and the top sash pulls down, and then you can lift the bottom sash like that, so you get ventilation coming in through the top and then circulating out through the bottom. Pretty sweet invention before AC. As a philosophy, a building philosophy, I like to keep things really simple. Here, this is a storm window. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. These things simply clip on to the outside of the window. They're clips on the top, and then they slide down into place. And then in the summer, when you want to put on the screens, you know, you unlatch the storm window from the outside, lift this up, and it lifts up off those clips up on top, and then you simply set the screens on. You know, you take those off and then put on your screen. This is such a foreign concept to people now, but up until 30 years ago, this is what every house had. So twice a year, you're pulling off the storms and putting on the screens. It can be a lot of work, and I think that's why people went away from this type of window, but it's the original window and how it was always done. When you take down an old house, you find all sorts of stuff. Here, what is this, like an old Bible? It's all in Norwegian. I have a totally obsessive personality. An old hymnal book. I've always loved to collect things. When I was little, I collected coins and old paper money. Old blue mason jars. I find tons and tons of these. Nice old light fixture. Pressed metal light fixture. Old shoes. These things are awesome. I just love old materials. The leather cutouts and the stitching, they're totally amazing. You know, I think for me a lot of it is this fascination of what the world once was, what the world must have been like 150 years ago. Old square nails, dime a dozen. You find whole houses that are built with old square nails. An old dinner bell. Dr. McLean's volcanic medicinal oil. Women's clothing catalog. By all accounts, our economy had industrialized by 150 years ago. An old door latch. But I think the products that were made back then, even though they were mass produced, were incredibly beautiful and put together well. These things are finials for the peak of a roof. You know, they're really cool. This is the Decora Posten. Decora actually had a Norwegian newspaper. I love old things, and I'm the same way about log houses. I have this big list in my head of buildings I want. You know, I have 4 of them stashed away in my parents' barn. If I had the time and money, I'd tear down as many of them as I possibly could. So we're going to the barn that I'm working on right now. I got a phone call this spring about this family who owns this old farmstead, and there's an old log barn out here that they want to fix up. And I've been working on it for far too long now, a number of months. It's taken way too long, but I think the end product will be pretty cool for them. This is the barn. I was thinking it was going to be much easier when I started this project. I think I had to replace like 15 or 16 logs total. On this side, you'll see the bottom 2 logs are replaced. I had to make new door and window frames, though there really weren't any to begin with. So persistence, I think, has been the biggest thing I have going for me. You'll notice up in the ceiling, these are all hand-hewn aspen poles. I had to basically reconstruct the whole roof. I had to go and find an aspen stand to cut down new ones for replacements. This work is hard physical work. I think people kind of think, what the hell is wrong with this kid? That he thinks he needs to do this type of stuff. I'm working on mortaring the logs. Once I get the mortar done, I'll put a lime wash over the whole wall and it'll be bright, crisp white in here. But it's the passion for me. There's a lot of fulfillment I get from doing something like this. Like, you should have seen this place when I started. It was like half sunk into the ground. There were big holes in the roof. You know, and then to see it come full circle is pretty satisfying and rewarding. I think a lot of preservationists kind of scoff at the idea of taking buildings apart and moving them and reconstructing them is like not some legitimate thing. You can't be a purist in this world, you know, especially when you look around the landscape here in Iowa and just realize the scale of how things are changing so quickly. What I've been doing is kind of a last-ditch effort. Often I'm right in front of the bulldozer trying to find these things and take them apart before they're burned or bulldozed in. The Boosness house was built in 1851 by Torgrim Boosness. This is Torgrim Boosness and his wife. He was one of the first white settlers to come to Winneshiek County in 1851. When I found the house, it was totally abandoned and in complete disrepair. It sat empty from basically 1915 until 2 years ago when I found it. It's really neat to find a house that's been abandoned for 100+ years, because those are the buildings that are really original and really authentic. Inside, the original front door dating to 1851, pretty cool to find something like that still in place. Putting a window right next to the door is the telltale Norwegian American giveaway. There's me with my full face respirator, trying to not inhale all the raccoon poo that was inside. I've been very conservative in what I do. When I take apart a building, I don't, come in with an excavator and claw off the siding and rip off the roof and extract the logs. I take the whole thing apart and try to salvage as much from the building as I can. Ideally, all these things would be saved on their original foundations, but, most people can't do that. So I think I've done the best with what I can do. There were many points through this whole process where I've just said, I'm totally sick of this. I don't want to even think about this crap anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. But at the end of the day, it's like the satisfaction of doing this that keeps me hungry for more. When I can do something and step back and be like, this is really authentic, this is what this thing looked like originally, like exactly like it did when I took the building down, I get huge satisfaction from that. So we live in a pretty sweet spot. This is my family farm. Living in a building like this, it's not very straightforward. It's not comfortable by today's standards. They're old. You know, it's quirky. There's a lot you have to deal with. The staircase it's really dangerous. The treads are 8 inches, and then the risers, instead of coming straight up, they come back at an angle. They come 4 inches back. So if you look at the staircase from above, you know, you only have really 4 inches to put your foot when you step down. This house measures 16 feet by 17 feet on the inside. It requires you to be efficient with space. You know, I think most people would say 16 by 17 feet with 2 people, it must be, you know, god awful. But like, we manage it pretty well.
If you look at some of the houses around here that were built by settlers, you know, you'd have 6 kids and 2 adults in a house this size. And that, I bet they spend a lot of time outside for various reasons. But
Bathroom is pretty small. It's a toilet and a sink, and then I have this old cabinet here, an old medicine cabinet. We use that. These little shelves I found in a house, they're really ornate. I didn't really do anything with them. You know, this is all salvaged stuff. You notice there are holes in it. The porcelain soap holder, like, this thing's awesome. I found this in a house. All the floors are salvaged tongue and groove fur. I think ultimately there's a cheapening that happens with the way things are made today. You know, everything's made to look like something else. Vinyl siding, you know, petroleum-based plastic siding that is made to look like wood clapboard siding. All the latches, the hinges, all the hardware in this place is from old buildings. When you look at any fixture within your house, and it's likely some pressed cheap metal made to look like something real. It's all kind of this like faux authenticity that I think just kind of cheapens everything. You'll notice this little latch here, you know, it's made out of wood, real simple, handmade. People always wonder, well, how did you pay for all this? And my response to that is always, well, you know, these buildings have been built really, really, really cheap. This house, for example, I think I have something like $20,000 into it. I've taken down like 10 houses now, and I paid for 2 of them. I paid $600 for one and $300 for the other. Otherwise, they've all been given to me. I think people are always kind of amazed at that. Well, how do you get a free house? But you have to understand it's kind of like a value-added thing in the sense that, you know, it's not free until you go to all the work of taking it down and rebuilding it. I don't even want to know how many hours I have in this house, like thousands and thousands, I'm sure of it. It's been a hobby of mine that's been dragging on and on and on for about 6 years now. Ultimately, I'd like to squeak out a living here. I have 3 other siblings, and you know, this farm means a lot to all of us, and we'd definitely like to keep it within the family. Hi, roosters. Hi. Hi, buddy. So I kind of have this like long-term fantasy of making a living off the land. Hi. It's been like a hobby farm. But this last year we got a little bit more involved. We have 7 goats and about 15 sheep right now. This last year we had 3 pigs. These are the cows. My father has a herd of belted Galloway cows, they're all grass-fed. You know, it takes like 30 months to finish one of his cows because they take forever to gain weight. There's something really appealing about having a whole barn full of animals that you rely on for your well-being. Hi, bovine. Ultimately, I'd like to expand my dad's beef cattle herd. I'm gonna rent my house out, turn it into an overnight rental. I'd also like to get more into cabinet making and furniture making. I love woodworking. This sweet little shelf I found in a house. Right here is a dovetailed joint, a detail that most carpenters wouldn't know how to do or wouldn't want to spend the time doing. My brother calls it the trifecta: CCC, cabinets, cabins, and cows. Ultimately, this is the place I want to be and the lifestyle I want for myself. Do I wish I lived 150 years ago? Yeah, I think that there are certain parts of how life once was that are really appealing. You know, there are also lots of things that would be terrible. Racism and disease and everything else. But at the same time, you know, there are a lot of things that seem really appealing. You know, for example, working with your hands. Having an occupation that you carry out every day in a physical sense is really appealing, and I don't think a lot of people have that experience anymore.
Do you want to bring it forward a little bit?
And also, I think the part that's ultimately most appealing to me, at least, is the fact that communities were really intact back then. You know, you would have had to rely on your immediate family and your immediate community for your own livelihood and your own survival. It's really cool to think that there would have been a whole team of maybe 3 to 5 people that would have gone out into the woods and cut down trees and hauled those trees to a building site, and then using only hand tools, they would have shaped the logs and then raised them up onto the wall and ultimately built a shelter for your neighbor or your friend.
Are you tightening that notch lower end, Paul?
I think there's something also really, really satisfying about that.
What are we doing?
Just kind of lifting it up onto that. 1, 2, 3. My uncle was a builder, and he always says that building houses is a very moral profession. There's nothing immoral about providing shelter for people.
Hold that. Just pick it up and lay it down.
There's at least an honesty to it that you really don't find today when everything is standardized and mass-produced and made to be produced and shipped and sold at Home Depot.
That looks clean.